Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ruth Skinner. For those of you who are joining us who are not in my class, thank you. You don't even have to be here, which is really wonderful. This is a class for the School for Advanced Studies in Arts and Humanities, or SASAH, and it's called Cultures of Advocacy. And so we are very privileged to be able to hear from different community members on a variety of topics. And it was, Brendon's name was at the top of my list, to be frank. When I was devising the course for the semester, Dr. Brendon Samuels is a very inspiring, it feels very rote, but he is, frankly, a very inspiring educator, community member, activist, advocate, and human being. And I have seen Brendon in action on campus. I've seen Brendon in action in a municipal environment at city council meetings. I've seen Brendon in publications. I've seen Brendon in Nature London magazine numerous times. And I just feel like Brendon's enthusiasm and passion and capacity for action at the local level is something that we all can model even to a fraction and make the world so much better for it. And so I will not belabor Brendon by reading his very extensive and very impressive biography. I will leave you to do that. I will hand the floor over to Brendon because the more time with Brendon, the better. I will say there will be time for questions. I am going to ask you to speak into this adorable little microphone should you have a question, because we are recording this for posterity. If anybody would prefer to not be on camera, just come see me after the talk and we will figure it out. So with that in mind, thank you, Brendon, for being here. Yay!
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. For the sake of the cameraman, I'm going to try and stay relatively stationary, but I will do my best not to have my back to anybody for the entirety of today. Thank you very much, Ruth, for hosting me. I've been looking forward to this, and I'm really excited to be in a room of people who care about advocacy, because we need your voices in the world today. And so it's really nice to have a forum where we can come together and hear from each other. The title of my talk is called Tending the Understory, Environmental Advocacy in a Time of Competing Urgencies. I think it's somewhat self-explanatory, but I thought I'd begin with some definitions like a good scientist. I am trained as a biologist. What you see in the image on my title slide is Understory. That's actually the Medway Valley Heritage Forest just behind Western's campus. And we'll be touching on the significance of the understory as a metaphor throughout my talk. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're going to be covering some pretty intense, pretty upsetting topics as part of this lecture today. And so I thought it might be helpful for us to begin just with a brief grounding exercise. I'm going to play a clip, and what I'm going to ask you to do is just close your eyes and listen for a minute or so. I'll pause it there. So I imagine listening to that, it was raucous. There was a lot going on in that recording. You heard some natural sounds, different birds. The really loud ones are blue jays. They're some of my favorites, but very noisy. You also heard some cars in the background, distant mechanical noises, a little bit of wind. That recording was produced by my partner and I at a site that actually looks very different from what you see on screen right now. That is at 101 Meadowlily Rd South. And the reason we recorded it in that spot at sunset was we knew that that site was being prepared for development. If you were to visit there now, you would find most of the vegetation has been cleared. It's mostly a field of clay with preparations being made for a new subdivision. And we wanted to record what that place sounded like, including the birds that you heard, the deer, the baby coyotes that we saw roaming throughout that hour-long recording, to capture a snapshot of what does that place sound like today, so that we could go back in the future and compare, against present day conditions, how is the soundscape changing in response to human pressures? And this is a story that's unfolding across Ontario, not just here in London. Habitat loss is encroaching on remaining natural spaces. And this was an example of how we used a different way of telling a story through sound, through arts, to capture an essence of a place for posterity. So if you want to look up more from the series, it's called London Soundscapes, recordings from ecologically and culturally significant sites all throughout London, Ontario. And you can find it on YouTube. We are really fortunate to be in London, which is also known as the Forest City. It gets its name from the towering forests that existed here before there was a city. We are part of the Carolinian life zone, so we have big deciduous trees, broad-leaved trees throughout our region. And another way that we refer to this shape of a gathering of trees as a forest is we would call the big trees the overstory. It's really the canopy. It's the utmost layer of foliage in the forest. It's what people mostly pay attention to when we think about a forest. And the overstory is what causes really everything underneath to be shaded. It absorbs most of the energy that is landing, reaching the earth from the sun. Before it reaches the ground, it hits the leaves in the upper canopy. But underneath the overstory, you have what we would call the understory. So this is a photo that I took at land beside Chippewa of the Thames First Nation and Oneida Nation of the Thames. It's actually owned by Western University. It's the site of a defunct observatory. Nobody really knows what the university is planning to do with that land, but it's ecologically really vibrant. And if you visit there, you will find a lush understory like what you see in this photograph. And so the understory is the layer of vegetation that grows beneath the main canopy of the forest, the overstory. You have the overstory and then you have the understory. And I like this as a metaphor because some of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about today concern the types of stories that we tell in our own lives about what matters to us. We go through the stories of the daily news cycle, what's important to society at the time. You might call that the overstory, the big picture things that we keep hearing about being the most important, taking up most of our energy. But what grows underneath that? What's the understory that we each want to cultivate? That's part of the theme for today's talk. So I want to pause and ask you, I imagine we've got people here from all over, maybe some locals. What do you love most about living in London? Feel free to raise your hand. Yeah. Anybody? Sure, go ahead. The weather.
I feel like
Okay.
you get to experience like all types of weather. You get to experience the winter, the summer, like the spring. It's not just like in some places where you only experience summer or like
Yeah, that makes sense to
variety of
me.
weather.
It's very dynamic. I appreciate that about London too. Around this time of year, I think some folks get fatigued with the winter, but I've learned to love it. Anybody else? What do you most love about living in London?
Geographically not that big, like 16 by 16 kilometers.
Yeah,
Pretty reversible.
good size, not too large, not too small. Anybody else? Yeah,
The people. Oh God.
the people. Okay, making Ruth get her exercise today. The people. Can you say more about that? What about the people?
Oh, well, I met someone like you being in London, and David Ferreira, and people who make change and care about others. I'm going to put a little bit of a damper on your message. I've heard a lot of people when I ask, so how's London? As students, they're like, I hate it here.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurts my heart to hear that, but I know why they're saying it. There's a lot of struggle in the community, but when you meet the people,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you fall in love.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. Anybody else?
Oh God, okay. Good. So I'm going straight here.
The bookstore, the local bookstore situation in London is phenomenal. Way better than Whitby, where I grew up. There's no local bookstores in Whitby, and I've seen like 5 at least here, and I love it.
That is a good observation. Absolutely. What about you?
In between a bunch of Great Lakes.
Yep.
So access to water.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you have your hand up?
Sure.
Yeah, I just like there's a good like biosphere of like city and like nature environments, like you're a stone's throw away from any trail or
Yeah,
dense
good points.
population of trees.
Okay, I'm glad to hear there's some overlap with some ideas that I was going to bring up. You know, as you pointed out, there's a lot of people who are quick to dump on London. There are challenges, but there are also things that people are quite fond of. And so, like, what I wanted to start this with is thinking about, like, what actually in London keeps us healthy and safe? Quick answer might be, well, the hospital, having a breathable atmosphere. But what's unique about London, I find, as was mentioned, is we have very good access to green spaces generally for a mid-sized city. No matter where you are in London, you're not too far from what we call the natural heritage system. You can get on your bike or go for a walk and find yourself in a green space, often located near the Thames River. As was referenced, we have abundant freshwater resources. We're surrounded by the Great Lakes. We're unlikely to run out of fresh water anytime soon. Considering the state of the world, that's actually quite precious, and that's a gift to us from nature. We're also surrounded in London by prime agricultural soil. Some of the most fertile soil in Canada that's left is around London, Ontario. Our climate is relatively moderate. I know you referenced the change of seasons a moment ago, but you know, compared to some places where the heat is overwhelming and the winter is unbearable, here it's pretty stable year-round, although we do have fluctuations. Pretty cold right now. And of course, we're also quite isolated from some of the worst natural disasters that occur in the world, as well as global warming fueled disasters. So things like major droughts, earthquakes, tsunamis. We're inland, so we're quite isolated and kept safe. So nature provides for us, and I'm going to use a dichotomy between nature and people, but of course I consider people to be part of nature. There are aspects of our society that are created by people that keep us healthy and safe. So some examples are, you know, our collective knowledge, our institutional memory, and the capacity that affords our communities to improve our material conditions. We can make life better if we choose to. Our social contract, we share a responsibility to take care of one another. If you get hurt in London and somebody notices, there's a good chance they're going to stop and help you just because they care. Geopolitical stability, supported by our democratic institutions and norms, you know, increasingly relevant in today's climate, but we are a relatively stable democracy, right? We get to vote, such as later this year in our local municipal election. You know, we pass laws and we enforce laws. These are things that are normalized in our society, but not the same everywhere. And of course, our physical infrastructure, the things that people before us built, you know, spending massive resources and effort to afford us the quality of life we have in all seasons. You can move around, you can acquire food, you're safe and healthy and warm in this building because of that massive investment historically. That's a photo of the community garden on Western's campus, which is a phenomenal asset that was built by people and continues to feed us. And so I want to pause for a second, think, you know, I mentioned this analogy, like what is the overstory? Well, what is London's overstory? What is the most important things that we hear about today if you follow the news cycle? Some of these. So homelessness, the state of the downtown, the state of international trade, growth, crime, competitiveness, economic development, mental health and addiction. I mean, these are all things that are front of mind for our politicians, our leadership, our society. And if you start to ask Londoners how do they feel about these things, you notice some resonant themes. So every year, the City of London publishes its annual resident satisfaction survey, mostly focusing on the delivery of municipal services, which we'll talk about in a moment. And this past year in 2025, the top of mind issue for people, of course, was the state of homelessness. 57% of residents that they surveyed said that was the most important issue, slight increase. Traffic and road congestion, mental health and addictions, high interest rates, you know, a number of other things. And then quality of life. Well, generally, 75% of Londoners say that their quality of life is good or very good, consistent with the previous year. Older residents in the city say that their quality of life is favorable, a bit higher than younger people. People are happy with the number of events that we have, activities, amenities, that it's a relatively safe and friendly city. This sounds rosy, right? Like people are expressing reasonable satisfaction, and the city is publishing, yeah, it's thumbs up. We get top grades for the delivery of municipal services. So not too surprising there. And yet we know that a lot of these crises are actually like getting to a critical point. Like people are dying in the streets as a result of homelessness and the current weather we are experiencing. We hear this covered in the weekly news and discussed at city council meetings all the time. We have a pretty good strategy for handling this, but nonetheless, we are still experiencing pretty intense symptoms, and society's most vulnerable are suffering as a consequence. If you are interested in homelessness, I mean, this is where you should start your research. This is the city's whole of community response program. It was considered at the time of its publication a leader in North America and maybe even the world for how we are integrating all of the right people who need to be involved in developing these solutions and then implementing them. And why this matters in our current climate is we know that in Ontario since 2022, homelessness has increased by 25%. That is huge. In London, that's around 20% now. 174 lives were lost between 2022 and 2024 that were attributable to homelessness. That's preventable suffering and death. And we expect that in the next decade, as of the time of publication, homelessness could triple. Pretty significant and scary, and understandable why we would be prioritizing that. Then, of course, there's all the other things that are contributing to people becoming homeless, like affordability. This past year, food insecurity has ballooned in London and across Ontario. Nearly 1 in 3 households in London is understood to be insecure in terms of their access to food. So you can imagine that's creating a lot of stress for people. And despite all of the challenges with maintaining, our quality of life, we're also growing really, really quickly. So London's population has now exceeded 630,000. The growth has tapered a little bit in recent months, but nonetheless, the city is sprawling outward. There's increasing strain on our programs. It's a lot for a local government to juggle, who are expected to balance growth in the near term, but also thinking out to 2050, for example. I wanted to show you a quick video that's provided by the City of London because I thought it was actually really good at explaining just the range of different things that the city has to account for as they plan for growth. So I'm going to press play.
The City of London takes pride in providing and maintaining the many services Londoners depend on every day, like transportation, clean drinking water, recreation, garbage collection, and recycling. The city has approximately $20 billion in municipal infrastructure assets that are critical to delivering these services. These include roads, bridges, sewer and water systems, recreation facilities, and parks. London is similar to many municipalities. We're facing challenges because of our aging infrastructure. Many of our assets are reaching the end of their life cycle, and there's a need for new infrastructure to service growth. This is where asset management planning comes in. Asset management planning is the process used to help make the best possible decisions regarding the building, operating, maintaining, renewing, replacing, and disposing of infrastructure assets. Simply put, it's all about making the right decision at the right time for the right amount. The city focuses on 3 fundamental goals: providing sustainable services to residents, optimizing municipal infrastructure asset value while minimizing lifecycle costs, and managing risks to service delivery. We take a proactive approach and initially developed a corporate asset management plan in 2014. In 2019, the city developed a new policy and updated its plan to meet the new provincial regulation requirements and improve management of all assets. The planning and policy development process provides a clear, detailed picture of our assets, needs, and priorities, which plays an important role in the development of London's multi-year budget. An optimal amount of funding is required to manage current and future asset risks. The difference between the optimal amount and available budget is what we call the infrastructure gap. If the infrastructure gap increases, it will result in inaccessible assets or assets that are not in optimal use. So we need to balance growth, catch up on overdue maintenance of existing assets, finance the replacement of old assets, and modernize our infrastructure to be better prepared for tomorrow's challenges, while striving to keep property taxes, water, and wastewater rates reasonable for residents. The city's corporate-wide asset management plan is how we prioritize our infrastructure needs to achieve the greatest benefit to our community and to ensure London is a great place to live now and well into the future. For more information on the City of London's asset management plan, visit london.ca/CAM.
Not the most exciting subject, to be sure, learning about asset management, but I thought this set the stage really well for what I wanted to touch on. If I can advance my slide. Uh-oh, Ruth, I'm in trouble. We'll just go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so asset management plan. One of the things I wanted to pick out from that video is the reference to what's called the infrastructure gap. This is a very complicated graph. It's taken from the corporate asset management plan that was updated in 2023. And what I wanted to show you here is that there is actually a pretty significant difference in terms of funding available to cover the cost of repairing infrastructure to keep it in a state of good repair compared to what we actually have to spend. The city has to manage this really strategically, but it's concerning because the costs of things are going up. You know, this puts pressure on budget cycles year after year. It's a significant burden on the city and future taxpayers and ratepayers for things like hydro. To give you just a sense of what is contributing to that, you know, one of the biggest cost contributors is transportation and mobility. We have sprawled outward as a city, and all that road infrastructure, all those highways, everything underneath the ground, that has a finite lifespan that needs to be serviced. And we're not alone in that. I mean, London manages its finances fairly responsibly, but across Ontario, there's a $52.1 billion infrastructure gap as of 2021, according to the Financial Accountability Office of Ontario. That is a massive debt. Essentially, it's a huge cost that is going to have to be covered, or assets are going to start to fall below that state of good repair. They're going to start crumbling. You're going to have more potholes. You're going to have more bridges collapsing. What are we going to do about that? And so I don't know if you guys have ever been in this room. Show of hands, have any of you been to City Hall before? Okay, a few. Good. It's an interesting time to be occupying a space like this, a little bit stressful, to be honest. And if you follow the local news cycle, you'll understand a bit why. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation circulating now in the public, but also at City Hall. Decorum has really dropped. A lot of people are quite nasty when they show up in the gallery at City Hall to share their opinion. You know, even the people that are serving as elected representatives are having a hard time communicating and working together. And this is not how it's always been, and this is not unique to London, Ontario, but it is a sign of the times right now. It's very intense. There's a lot of animosity. And you know, this translates to how engaged people are with local government, right? We had an election in 2022 in London that saw record low voter turnout. Only 25% of people who were eligible to vote in the last election in 2022 actually cast a ballot. We have another election I mentioned earlier coming up in October of this year, and I remain to be convinced that people are going to be more excited to show up to vote this time. I think we should vote for a lot of good reasons, but people are tuned out. They're not engaged with what's happening in the day-to-day, and they don't understand necessarily what the local government is responsible for. So let's zoom out for a second. You know, I've given you a bit of London context, some of the good, some of the bad, but what's happening here, right, on planet Earth, which seems really large at our scale, but in the grand scheme of the universe, it's just a tiny little speck. This report is published each year by the World Economic Forum, assessing the state of global risks. And you can tell from the ominous photo, the risks are not looking so great right now. They have mapped out a bunch of different risks based on consultations with, I think, 15 or 1,700 experts all over the world. You can see them here displayed in terms of short-term and long-term severity on the X and Y axis. Really complicated, right? And we're not going to dive into too much of that today, but I wanted to highlight this graph because I think what we should be using is a term to describe the state of all of these crises interacting with one another. And that term, coined going back a couple decades, is called the polycrisis. It's where you have a cluster of what seems like distinct crises that are interacting in ways that can amplify their effects, and they can reinforce one another. It's quite difficult actually to tease out or pull out one single crisis and deal with that. You have to think of it as a whole. I put together a few interesting notes just from this report. So this is from, again, this past year, and they asked experts, what are the biggest risks that come to mind for you, for the world? Well, top two, geoeconomic confrontation and state-based armed conflict. Interesting that they were in orange. I don't know if that was a coincidence, maybe. Underneath that, you've got extreme weather events, societal polarization, misinformation and disinformation across a range of risk categories. What's interesting, though, is they, as I mentioned, do this study year after year. And so this figure compares short-term 2-year risks between this year's assessment and the previous one. And look at what's stable. So the things that people are saying are still really important are inequality, lack of economic opportunity, insufficient public infrastructure, infectious disease, etc. But the biggest fall in ranking on the right side shows mostly green items. Critical changes to the Earth's systems, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, pollution. That means a year ago, more people were saying, this is really, really important and it poses significant risks to the world over the next 2 years. That has dropped quite a bit. This is the same data set, but split up across age brackets. So they looked at experts across a variety of ages all over the world. And what I wanted to highlight is there's only one place on this entire chart that biodiversity loss appears. Where is it? It's for the people under 30 years old. People under 30 consistently rank biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse as a near-term risk over the next 2 years. Seems to be lost on some of the older crowd. Now, if we shift a little bit, look past the 2-year horizon, let's think, what are the long-term risks? Well, they asked their participants the same question. And it turns out that over the next 10 years, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse and critical changes to the Earth systems still rank really, really important, top of the list. Not something we should be worried about in the next 2 years for some reason, but over the next 10, oh boy, scary. So that's a tension, right? Are we thinking about the near term or are we thinking about the long term in terms of our priority? This is alarming. It's bright red for a good reason. The IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, for many years has been sounding the alarm that we are driving many, many, many other species to extinction on planet Earth. Nearly a third of species on planet Earth are at risk of extinction, primarily because of human activities or their consequences. Here's just a breakdown of the species that we have already characterized, that we know are at risk. There's a lot of other biodiversity on planet Earth we have never mapped. There are species we are losing faster than we can even name them. That doesn't really care about the next 2 years or the next 10 years. This is changing the horizon for all of life on planet Earth, perhaps permanently. This is an interesting study published in 2021 in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. They took into consideration where in the world do we really need to prioritize conservation efforts for access to fresh water, for carbon sequestration, and for biodiversity. And you can see a heat map where red is some of the top priority areas perceived all over the world. Now, that doesn't mean the areas shown in blue are not important, but based on a variety of evidence that they combined, they determined this is where we should invest our efforts in order to maximize savings across those three strata. And so look at where we are in the upper left corner. We are in an area that is considered quite important, Eastern Canada. And if you zoom into Canada, this is a different data set from NatureServe showing the concentration of animals, plants, fungi listed as species at risk. Those are concentrated along the lower part of the country, which happens to be where the population density is the greatest. And we have the greatest competition for resources like fresh water, like access to land, habitat, etc. Not to be overly alarming, but there's also this concept that's been popularized in recent years, which is tipping points. The idea that Earth's systems eventually reach a point where if you continue to deteriorate conditions even further, we're not going to be able to go back. Things are going to become even more destabilized, and it's going to have permanent and lasting effects. And so this report, is quite ominous for 2025. And so were the previous ones, pointing out that no one in the world is immune from this. That even in, Northeast America, the collapse of oceanic currents in the atmosphere could have major consequences for our climate conditions that we talked about before being relatively stable. That this is going to impact food, where people can live on planet Earth, access to fresh water. I mean, this is extremely alarming on the global stage, but does it matter to us locally? Are we talking about it here in our municipal realm? That's what today's talk is about, right? How can we be aware of this, that things are not fine, but our day-to-day, what we hear in the news cycle, the decisions that are being made don't necessarily reflect that things are not fine at all. We've talked about London's overstory, right? These really important things that a lot of people and our leaders care about quite a bit and are investing resources towards. But what might we think about fitting into the understory if we look a little deeper? Well, things that fit in London's understory, we get to decide. We get to choose what are the stories that matter to us. So for me personally, some of the things that matter: other species, the non-human that we share space with, transformative ideas, things that we're not talking about yet in the mainstream, but we can cultivate. The state of the land that we're on, pollution, changes to the atmosphere. Nature positive designing and planning, not just about reducing impacts, but actually giving back, making space for other species to thrive. New ways of being in the world. Old ways of being in the world, things we can bring back from our past before everything got so intense that might become more useful again. Maybe even some alternatives to capitalism, which seems to be driving a lot of the challenges that we're facing globally and locally. Acceptance. How do we accept that things are perhaps broken beyond repair? That is a story that we can cultivate. Slowing down, denying that the rate of life that we've become accustomed to is going to have to continue in perpetuity. It is unsustainable. Can we normalize slowing down? Can we start to take care of one another on mainstream, right? Can we provide mutual aid and ensure people's needs are being met? Can we continue to advance the work of decolonizing institutions that have led to, the proliferation of capitalism and a lot of problematic institutions that are upholding the status quo? And then how do we build assets that are managed and owned and cared for by the community? These are all things that perhaps we could be seeding and growing in the understory today. And so my point is, it's up to each of us to plant and tend to that understory so that one day it can succeed into the canopy of tomorrow, and it will become the overstory, the main story. Because at some point, everything dies. And it might be that you have a really dense overstory until one day a mature tree passes away, it falls to the ground, and it leaves behind a gap. And that gap allows sunlight through. And those tiny little seedlings that you were growing underneath that may have been there for some time in the understory, they can finally thrive because we are pouring more energy into those. We can plant those seedlings anytime and continue caring for them. So given all of these competing urgencies I've talked about at the municipal scale with the cost of things and the crises we're facing, at the global scale, which is just sort of incomprehensible in magnitude for most of us, how do we advocate for nature and other species when it doesn't seem urgent, when it's always been this way, as far as we can remember? What does it mean to be an environmentalist in 2026? And so I think this is a personal question for everybody who advocates. For me, I can answer it as it's a way of being in the world. It's about caring and showing up and trying your best. It's about planting those seeds in the understory, like I talked about, watering them where needed, like the conversations that we're having right now. And it's about holding space for things that might become real later, but now is not their time. I want to tell you a story just to ground the next part of my talk in my values, and hopefully this relates. This is the Thames River near my home. I live in the east part of the city. And one day I got a call from somebody who said, there's a Canada goose that was unfortunately tangled in fishing line in the water, and it looks like it needs some help. Can you come and try and recover it? This was back in April. Fortunately, the city had put up signs after a whole incident with another bird getting tangled. This is quite a significant issue in the watershed for wildlife. I found its mate, who was watching from the other bank of the river and looking on, and I ran up and down for quite a while looking for that bird, and sadly I couldn't find it. And while I was, wrapping up and preparing to head home, I walked back under the bridge along Adelaide Street. And you can see on the underside of that bridge, there's these ledges up there. You wouldn't make much of them, but actually those are really useful spots for birds that nest at all times of the year. And so while I was walking by, I think I was just, picking something off the ground, I heard a splash in the water. And the splash kind of startled me, and I thought, somebody throwing rocks? No, actually, it was a pigeon, a baby pigeon that had been spooked by a car passing over the bridge, and it fell into the water. And it quickly started flapping its wings. It was like trying to float. Pigeons are not great swimmers, not compared to this duck, for example, that seemed kind of concerned actually and circled around it a couple times, but didn't really know what to do either. And so the water was quite high that day, and the pigeon was being carried down the river. And I was watching, and I thought, I have to do something. And it was cold. That river does not smell great. I don't recommend swimming in it, but nonetheless, I stripped down into my underwear and I jumped in the river. And in that photo, that pigeon is just like gasping for breath, managed to pull it out, scraped up my knee pretty bad. And I laid this pigeon down, and I was just there sort of catching my breath. And all of a sudden, this giant dog runs up behind me, and it picks up the pigeon in its mouth and it gives it a shake. And it drops it on the ground and it runs off. And the pigeon died. And I was like shocked. I didn't know what to do with that at the time. Immediately after, a gentleman came up to me. He was in the soccer field next door. I think he was chasing his dog. And he seemed very apologetic. He spoke Spanish. He did not speak a word of English. He had his dog off leash, which is illegal in the city. And the dog was doing what dogs do, and it caught this pigeon in its mouth and it gave it a shook, and that was the end of it. And so I present you with this story because to me, this captures a lot of what I feel about handling environmental issues in a context like ours. There's value in saving a world, however small. This is not going to deal with the poly crisis, but my decision to jump into that river could have been a matter of life or death for that animal, that baby pigeon that could have had a time in the world. Showing compassion for other things is a praxis. It's something that you do as a process. It's a way of being in the world. Sometimes you try your best and you fail, and that has to be good enough, right? Was I bummed out that that pigeon died? Absolutely. But I have no regrets. When we struggle to solve environmental problems, we have to consider that these problems are occurring in social contexts, right? So off-leash dogs, huge problem for wildlife in the city. People come and live in London from all over the world where they bring a different understanding of what it's like to have a dog. That dogs should be allowed to run by themselves. How do we communicate this so that it's accessible to more people? And for me, experiencing a lot of suffering in the work that I do, you come to appreciate that it's the flip side of finding joy and meaning in the work. That if you didn't know what failure looked like, that if you couldn't feel sad or angry, that somehow the joy would be less, right? There have been other animals that I've saved, and I thought, thank goodness, because I know what that loss felt like. And so, I've talked about my personal experience at a few scales. I want to emphasize that changing the world, changing systems as an advocate is really hard. And for me, I've learned a lot from people with lived experience. There's a couple of them even in this room that have helped me a lot over the years. And so I want to just quickly run through some case studies. These are things that I've worked on in London over the past 5 or so years. And I want to try and link those to why I think lessons in advocacy have to do with what we learn from one another. So I'll start with the focus of my PhD work, which was about preventing birds from crashing into glass on buildings. I've stitched together a few different presentations I've given on this topic. So if you walk around Western's campus, have you guys ever seen the little dots on the glass? Show of hands. Anybody recognize those? Okay, I see a few hands go. It goes up every year. This is the problem. This is a characteristic sign that a bird, probably pigeon, has crashed into a window because they get confused by it. Bird collisions are very widespread in the environment. For my PhD, I studied this problem by keeping track of where birds were crashing into glass on campus and in London. Those blue points show on the map where birds had been found. They happen at all kinds of buildings in many different contexts. Most of the time, birds are crashing during the day, and there's a variety of factors associated with the conditions of a building and its surrounding landscape that can influence the risk. The main reason why birds hit glass is they look at this and they don't understand it. That does not exist in the natural world. Vertical mirrors that we've put pretty much everywhere on most buildings has essentially created this giant optical illusion that gives birds the impression that it's safe for them to fly through there. So reflective glass is quite dangerous. Sometimes glass is see-through, like on a balcony railing or a bus shelter. Birds just don't see it, kind of like a person running into a sliding door. And most of the time, birds are crashing into glass. It's where the birds are. So where you've got green space around a building, like the forest that grows around Western's campus. This is a really sad photo of birds that were collected by volunteers in the Greater Toronto area and staged in a layout by an organization called FLAP Canada. FLAP stands for the Fatal Light Awareness Program, and I've been working for them for a few years. These are thousands of birds that were picked up by volunteers that lost their lives after hitting a window. This represents just a tiny fraction of all of the birds that were actually affected in that period of time. All these birds died in the same year. So we know that in Canada, it's killing around 25 million birds per year, this issue. And around the world, that number is likely on the order of billions, that many different bird species are vulnerable to collisions. Some seem to be affected worse than others, and that we know we can solve this problem because we have solutions for it. But in order to solve the problem, there's diffuse responsibility among different stakeholders, and we have to engage with those stakeholders to help them understand. Another misconception I want to address is people think this only happens at tall buildings like skyscrapers, and actually that's not true. Most of the time birds hit glass, it's happening at low-rise buildings and residences, which are way more numerous on the landscape. Remember I said birds are crashing where you have trees around the building? It's usually at or below the height of the trees, so it's the first 4 stories. And when we lose all those birds, it's not just about the individual animals. Maybe you care about birds like I do, maybe you don't, but you probably care about all of the benefits that birds provide for life on Earth and for us, like seed dispersal, pollination, pest insect control. If you have roadkill on your street and it disappears one day, there's a good chance you could thank a turkey vulture for that. There are natural garbage cleanup crew. They control populations of pests like rodents, and of course they're vital parts of the food web for other animals and ourselves. And so think about that photo of all those birds that were lost, and for the individual bird, what it would accomplish, the services it would provide over its uninterrupted lifespan. So for example, this is a bird that actually collided on Western's campus, and it survived. Somebody called me and said, oh, this bird needs to be recovered. And, let it recuperate in a box, let it go. This is a yellow-billed cuckoo. Really interesting, exotic-looking migratory bird, and this is a caterpillar hunting machine. So, for example, a couple of years ago, we had a big scare with spongy moth caterpillars, an invasive species that completely defoliated large areas of forest. This is part of the solution for that problem. These birds are essential in combating populations of invasive species. Another example, if you see an oak tree growing in the wild, there's a chance that if you went back in time, you could thank a bird for having planted an acorn there in that spot prior. A single bird like a blue jay can disperse thousands of seeds throughout a single year. And so imagine what it's doing over its lifespan. Quite a profound impact on ecology. So what you can do to solve this problem at your own home, most importantly, is you can treat your windows and your glass balcony railings. You can do so with dotted tape. You can do so with a paint marker. Come talk to me after if you'd like suggestions of solutions. If you feed birds, try and move your feeder closer to the window. within 0.5 meter is ideal. That way, if a bird takes off, they're unlikely to gain enough speed to hurt themselves. That's my back window at home. And sometimes people ask me, well, what about these stickers? They're quite popular. Can we use these? And I created a graphic which explains why that's not such a good idea. If you're a little bird and you're trying to figure out how to get to the green space that you see through that window, I mean, you can pretty easily fly around the treatment. You would want to put a sticker like that in every box, and I'm afraid that would not look very nice. So I mentioned that for my PhD, I tried to figure out where are birds crashing into glass on campus at Western. We used a project on iNaturalist, which is a citizen science platform. Basically, point and shoot. Have you guys heard of this app before? See some nodding heads. So have you heard of this before? iNaturalist is basically a Pokedex, but for all living things in the real world and the environment. So you can point your camera at a plant or a bug or something you're wondering what is that thing, and it will identify it for you. And critically, it will also save a record that you observed that organism in that spot at that point in time. And that data becomes quite useful for researchers like me. So we use iNaturalist for logging all kinds of species here on campus and throughout London. Here's some examples. This is just a quick snapshot, a little bit old now, of observations throughout the city of London. Each of those points represents where somebody observed some living thing in the environment. Pretty cool, actually. And on campus, we had a project called the Biodiversity Inventory, where we documented the presence of over 1,200 species right here at Western that we are sharing space with and that are potentially being impacted by our activities. And so this was an accessible way of getting people in touch with the natural world. And in turn, it supported my research because people were using this app to record where they were finding birds that hit windows. So we collected quite a few birds, just like the photo from Flap, and we laid them all out. These are birds that were collected on campus at Western in just 2019 by volunteers. And we staged them because we wanted to tell the story of this being relevant, this happening right here, and this being something that we can do something about. We also broke down where we were finding these birds according to the building, and that supported the advocacy to start to look at solutions with the university administration. So I went to my student society. I was at the time a graduate student, so I was a member of the Society of Graduate Students, and I said, I care about sustainability, and this is a problem at Western. What can we do about it? And I sought support from the Society's administration. The equivalent for undergrads would be the Western USC. And they were kind enough to send a letter to the university president explaining this issue and asking for a meeting. Can we figure out a solution? It was also covered by the student newspaper, the Gazette, and it became a larger conversation. And it took a little bit of time, but Western actually really stepped up. They invested in a solution, a pattern of dots that were applied on the worst buildings, starting with the worst buildings, according to my research. We started with the International and Graduate Affairs building. No longer will you find dead birds outside that building if you go for a walk, and much of the glass has been treated with a dotted pattern. And they didn't stop there. In fact, there are now more buildings at Western treated for bird safety than any other university in North America that I know of. And this was because the community showed up and said, this is really important to us. I'm really proud of this slide because I felt that having examples of bird-safe glass on every post-secondary institution's campus meant that we would create more learning opportunities for the next generations of leaders to see what a sustainable building looks like. And so these are photos from all of these institutions. Not all their glass is safe, but at least some of it. And I know for certain that when they do tours on campus about sustainability, this is something that comes up. And so this is an experiential learning environment, and this is passively teaching new people all the time. So my work with Flap really focuses on the intersection between these four aspects of bird collisions with glass. We have to deal with the existing buildings by retrofitting them. We have to make sure we've got policy in place for new construction. We have to engage the public so that they understand what actions they can take and that they care. And we need policy ultimately to weave all of this together. And if we achieve these in tandem, ultimately, we will get to our goal, which is to change behavior. It's to change the behavior of bird feeding people. It's to change the behavior of architects, planners, and it just becomes the new normal. And so as I was approaching advocating to the university, I thought to myself, what does Western value? How do I present what I'm asking them to do in terms that they care about? And At the time, and I believe still currently, they valued sustainability quite a bit. Western's been recognized by international rankings as a highly sustainable institution. We have a new climate and sustainability strategy. Many of our buildings on campus are rated as sustainable under the LEED program. And so I came to them and I said, there's strong alignment here, right? We should be protecting biodiversity because this matters to you. And I helped them to tell positive stories. So it wasn't, Western's killing birds. It was Western is doing the right thing. They are showing leadership and they are supporting scholarly research that's addressing a problem in society. And they were super happy about this because it became a positive thing. It wasn't negative. It was a chance really to build their reputation. We also extended it beyond just treating glass for birds, but making our campus bird friendly. I demonstrated to them people really value this. They want to be able to look at birds on their way to class. And so all throughout Western's campus, you will find examples of projects where we actually made space to celebrate the presence of birds in our community. There are owl boxes put up across campus that might have baby owls in them at this time of year. We had tree swallows nesting. There's a platform by the stadium where osprey build their nests every year. And then there's a structure for supporting barn swallow nests. We also put up all kinds of signage because I explained to the university, no one's going to understand what this is unless we tell the story. And so at a lot of these sites, you will find examples of signage that we developed that explains why this is important and who put it here. And when you read it, you feel like you're a part of something perhaps larger than yourself. This is a slide I love because I think we can all relate to the presence of Canada geese on campus. It can be a little dicey at times, but the messaging that Western has adopted is let's coexist with these beautiful animals, right? It doesn't have to be confrontational. It doesn't have to be scary. Why are Canada geese attacking in the spring? Well, it's because they're good parents, right? They are protecting their young, their babies, just like we would protect our babies. And so Western implemented a program. If you see a goose nesting in a bad spot on campus, you can let them know with the hotline, and they will actually erect a barrier around that. They can respond if the animal's in trouble. It's all about coexisting, and it's a positive thing. I took my work beyond Western's campus and I started getting involved with this program called Bird Friendly Cities. London is certified as a bird friendly city, which is a program offered by Nature Canada. And we are one of, I believe, almost 80 communities across Canada now participating in the program, but we were one of the first. And we were also rated very high in their certification for doing a lot of good things for birds. That is our famous mascot selected by a popular vote. Of course, it's the big red one. People love it. And it's useful for storytelling, right? Like those are feathers left on glass by a cardinal. Why would you want to hurt this bird that we cherish so much? And so doing work throughout the city has been really instructive for me as an advocate. I became interested in the intersections between those environmental and social dimensions I talked about. For example, I treated my windows at home, cost me about $20. If you're dependent on, let's say, food stamps, $20 might be tough to invest to do something that's non-essential. And so through sponsorship from the city, we distributed kits of tape to people using the food bank. We also treated their windows, and we provided access to anybody who cares enough to treat their windows at home, regardless of their means. I thought to myself, where are people getting information about birds? If a bird hits their window at home, who would they go to for advice? Well, if they feed birds, probably the people that sell them that stuff. So I struck up a friendship with the folks that run our local bird feeding store, Wild Birds Unlimited, and they were so keen to support this. They started distributing the product. They even let me treat the windows on their storefront to serve as an example. We've had all kinds of fun programs over the past couple of years. It's been a win-win. Similarly, people are really interested in planting native species. Where would you go for that? Well, maybe a garden center. Hemans was kind enough also to start selling this product, and we also treated the windows on the front so that everybody entering the greenhouse gets to interact with an example. We hosted participatory workshops where we invited people to come out, get their hands dirty, experience what it's like to treat a window as a group. So here's posters from a few of our advertisements. Really fun, easy for kids to get engaged with, and we put up a sticker at the end indicating that the window is bird safe for passersby. We even had a documentary produced about one of our workshops at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology just around the corner, where participants got to talk about why this was important for them. This is a fun photo. This is the Environmental Leaders Program down at Westminster Ponds, just south of here. And on that ladder is Councillor Schuyler Frank. She's an elected official who learned about this issue and was actually quite involved with Bird Friendly London and went on to be a huge champion for protecting birds in our city, perhaps informed by some of her experiences actually doing the work herself. And so we've gone back and worked with these students quite a few times in grades 7 and 8. One of the things that I also became concerned with in London is that, we do have healthy green spaces, but where are most of the birds? In fact, they're out in the countryside, the rural area, and particularly they are on Indigenous managed territory. So if you were to go follow the Thames River downstream or get in your car and drive for about 40 minutes, you would arrive at the territories of 3 neighboring First Nations, Chippewa of the Thames, Oneida, and Munsee Delaware Nation. And I was invited through a partnership with the Conservation Authority to treat windows at an Antler River Elementary School at Chippewa. And you can see why it's so important. Like, that's their school building. It backs onto this massive forest wetland complex. There were more birds in there singing than I have ever heard in my life. And so we brought film and we treated windows there to educate all of the students that pass through that school building, but also to protect birds right at the school. We even brought treatments for homeowners there. So we gave away bird feeders, treated some windows on the reserve. I was able to share feathers with them that I had collected because under Canada's constitution, they actually do not require a permit to collect feathers. They have treaty rights to do such. And the feathers that I collected, I was able to pass along to them for traditional uses. We advocated to our local government here in London that we need policy to deal with this. To do so, we engaged a bunch of volunteers to go out and look for birds that had crashed into glass on buildings, and then we prepared a detailed report that was submitted to the Planning and Environment Committee of City Council. With all kinds of data, this was sort of put on the radar for city staff, and it became a revolving discussion item over the following years. And the city has been a pretty good partner in our work, providing a lot of education for local development industry so that they can incorporate bird-safe design into their process, and performing public education services so that people know what to do at home. Recently, they even treated our bus shelters. So all of the new rapid transit stations being erected across the city are bird-safe. Super proud of that. This is a fun project, neighborhood decision making. This was an idea pitched by a member of the public, funded by popular vote. They wanted to treat windows on a community center. I was involved in creating a custom design. More than dots. Let's celebrate the birds that we are trying to protect in our city. All of this made possible through advocacy done as a group and participatory budgeting. I will say it's really not the responsibility of the municipality to protect migratory birds that travel vast distances. In Ontario, the government has the authority to regulate how buildings are constructed through the building code. And so we've gone back year after year to the provincial legislature at Queen's Park in Toronto to advocate. We even staged a layout there. I was really pleased to be involved with creating a piece of legislation that was proposed that would embed a bird-safe standard in the building code and normalize bird-safe design across the province. Here's MPP Chris Glover and myself, Michael Mazier, the executive director of FLAP, and colleagues really coming together around this shared priority for birds. That's just language of the bill. And unfortunately, despite a lot of hard effort showing up in the cold of winter, year after year to advocate for this and garnering actually multi-partisan support for this bill, it did not pass. And that hurts to think about, but we have so much support behind us now. There is so much awareness and understanding. I think it's just a matter of time before we can pick up the reins. The federal government also has responsibility on this front. Under the migratory birds regulations in Canada, it's illegal for buildings to kill birds. This is information from the Government of Canada website. Do these apply to window collisions? Can buildings kill birds? No, they cannot. Yes, the migratory birds regulations apply. And in particular, birds that are listed as species at risk under federal legislation are also protected additionally. So these are examples of birds that I found in London that were killed and are protected by federal law. Last year, I published my thesis, and in it, I talk about how in the recovery strategies for these species, the government says this is a priority, so what are we doing about it? Not a whole lot, actually. We need to create more regulations and incentives to normalize this and make it easier to treat more buildings. I took birds that we had collected here in London, in Ottawa, Guelph, Toronto, and I brought them right to the foot of Parliament, right as Mark Carney was being sworn in as Canada's new Prime Minister. and we laid them out to raise awareness that this is federal responsibility. We continue to push for this petition, which is calling on the federal government to create incentives and to enforce regulations that make it illegal for buildings to kill birds. If you're interested to sign this, happy to share a link with Ruth afterwards, or you can just scan it with a QR code. So key takeaways. I know this was a bit of a longer spiel about birds and glass. Meet people where they're at. If you're trying to engage with folks to change how they decide what to do with their buildings, be that their home window or a campus building, call them in, right? Explain it in terms that are important to them. Use positive framing and shared values. Doesn't always have to be negative. And try and model and channel success at different scales. Maybe you start really small with a little workshop and you build it up from there. Understanding policies and their applications, really, really important for making sure your advocacy lands. So do your homework. And invest in relationships that might last longer than the politics of the day. Some of the things that we try to do don't materialize overnight, but if we sustain the relationships, we can try again. I want to quickly fly through a couple of other case studies and then leave some times for questions. This was a fun project that was aimed at promoting equity in feeding birds in London. You might see these signs if you visit parks in London. We have a bylaw that says it's illegal to feed wildlife. Unless, of course, you have one of these in your backyard. If you have a nice big backyard and you can afford to go spend hundreds of dollars at a bird feeding store, have at it. And I was thinking about it because that's not fair to me, right? Like, people enjoy feeding birds regardless of how much income they make. And sometimes people feed birds and they cause harm because they're feeding the wrong things. So for example, people notoriously feed birds bread, which clogs their digestive system and makes them very sick. For example, this is angel wing syndrome, which afflicts ducks and Canada geese. This comes from that bird having eaten too much bread when it was young. That bird is never going to be able to fly because it has a malformed wing. How do we talk about this? How do we, ensure that people know what to feed and the correct amounts to feed? As I mentioned earlier with the story with the pigeon, not everybody comes to London with the same level of understanding, and they don't necessarily even speak English. So through this Bird Friendly London project, we created resources that are meant to be accessible in a variety of languages because people of all cultural stripes and coming from all over the world care about feeding birds. We also tried to create access for feeding birds. So a couple of years ago around the holidays, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if folks that were living rough got to enjoy the same feeling that I have when I feed birds in my backyard? And so we teamed up with a bunch of partners in the community and we gave away birdseed. It's as simple as it sounds. With every bag of birdseed came a little business card. Thank you for what you do to care for the birds. Here's what's safe to feed and here's what's unsafe to feed. This was crazy. I went to Home Depot. I bought 1,500 pounds of birdseed. The guy was like, "Are you serious? Okay, what are you doing with it?" And I took it to that environmental leaders program I talked about that helped me treat the windows on their classroom. And we bagged up all that birdseed, huge amounts of it, and we took it to the London Public Library to distribute for free, birdseed giveaway. I also took some to frontline agencies that are serving people with homelessness. I was volunteering with one at the time called Arcade Street Mission. And one of the people that came in regularly took a bag of seed and they said to me, "It's so nice to receive something just because it's a nice to have. It's not a bare necessity and essential just for survival. It's like, this is just good." They felt it was very humanizing for them. And this might be the first chance they get to actually feed birds properly. And with it comes education. Oh. So key takeaways. Feeding birds brings a lot of people joy, but excessive or incorrect feeding causes harm. The rules don't apply equally to everybody. Some people are disadvantaged and excluded, and that means the harms they might be unintentionally causing go unaddressed. Access to experiences like feeding birds can facilitate awareness and reduce those risks, giving people an opportunity to learn and a reason to care. Quick third one, a home for London's bank swallows. If you go downriver from Western's campus, eventually you'll reach Springbank Park, and just south of there, there's what's called a gravel pit. It's where for many years they dug huge amounts of sediment out of the ground to make cement and concrete and other things. That gravel pit is now wrapping up. They're not taking fill out. They want to turn it into a housing complex. This is what it looks like. Really beautiful. Private property, so unfortunately you cannot go there right now. I was working with the city a few years ago, and I received word that they're looking at starting to develop there. And we got a subject lands status report where they were looking at what is on the site that we need to be thinking about. And in that report, they said, well, we went and we saw there's around 70 to 75 burrows of this type of bird, which is called the bank swallow. It is a threatened species in Ontario. They also said, those birds migrate, they're nomadic, they'll go somewhere else, it's fine. Interestingly, the province of Ontario, which regulates the Endangered Species Act, acknowledges that this bird really depends on gravel pits in Ontario. Over half of the provincial population breeds in gravel pits. And so 70 to 75 burrows, is that much to worry about? Well, I went and took a look, and no, actually, there was well over 1,000 nest burrows. I mapped every single burrow, and we counted them by hand and with software, and confirmed the breeding population at the site was at least 2,000 individuals, making it the largest inland colony of bank swallows known in Ontario. And this was going to be cleared. This is going to be developed. So we mapped all this out. We sent it to the city. We sent it to the authorities. We documented using iNaturalist what was growing, what was living there. And we discovered a conflict in the legislation. In Ontario, there's laws that apply to aggregate resources, and then there's laws that apply to endangered species. Well, the aggregate resources one is more important, and there's a big loophole in it that basically carves out an exemption that would allow those nest burrows to be destroyed. I asked everybody I could think of, federal government, provincial government, local government, what is the deal with this? Are these birds protected or are they not protected? They're a species at risk, and we still don't know. And so we started a petition, and we made a lot of noise. In fact, we collected over 30,000 signatures, people calling on the local government, save London's bank swallows. We want them to continue to have a home in London. And eventually, we got through to the local government. Skylar Frank, our councillor on the ladder, came through and introduced a motion that passed with unanimous support that the future development of a park master plan for that site will include habitat for the bank swallow. We still don't know exactly what that looks like, but it is provided for with direction from City Council. I was interested in this secondary plan that was published a little while later, and underneath it says, and this is a bit unusual, you wouldn't normally see that included explicitly, provincially threatened birds are known to occur in the study area, and we're working on it. Just to kind of provide some relief, I guess. We don't know exactly what is going to happen with this site, but we have a lot of ideas. We could be creating, for example, artificial habitat for the bank swallow and actually turn this into an ecotourism destination where people can come and enjoy living alongside these birds and see them. They're quite rare. So stay tuned for that. Key takeaways. The right time to consider protecting the non-human world is early in the planning process. If we had started this conversation later, we might not have gotten very far. That even a disturbed urban landscape like an aggregate pit, where tractors had been working for decades, can still be really important for biodiversity. Sometimes policies like the Endangered Species Act actually are not the answer, and you need political will. That direction from a local councillor seems to weigh more than the Endangered Species Act in this case. That sometimes when you advocate, the change is going to take a really long time to materialize, and that the progress you're making might be similarly unclear throughout, right? It might be that you don't know what the outcome is going to be while you're fighting for it. And that, in my experience, if you can link conservation activities to belonging and use the word home for other species, that seems to resonate with a lot of people. Okay, last one, real quick, live staking at Western. If you go north of campus, past the hospital, and you look to the right, you'll see a creek. And at that creek, we have planted all kinds of things. This was a project that I led a couple of years ago at Western with support from the university. This is what it looked like before. We had some pretty severe flooding conditions every time the snow melted in January. The red line is where the creek bank actually is, the ground. And water would just spill over, which was kind of scary actually, and could be quite expensive. So I posed this research question and applied for a grant called Thinking Globally, Acting Locally. If we plant trees on along the watercourse, how will that help with flooding? To frame this in terms of what the university cared about, I used the Sustainable Development Goals. My research proposal was looking at these ones in particular. And I linked it to their strategic plan. Specifically, they talked about protecting biodiversity, taking care of the river that runs through campus. I centered it around really the language that was being used by the university at the time. I learned a lot about flooding in the process of doing this work, such as the fact that a huge amount of Western's campus is floodplain, meaning it's expected to flood regularly. Huge expensive concern for the surrounding area and London as well. And that this is insanely expensive for society. That in 2022, there was $3.1 billion of damages that were insured in Canada. That's getting worse. And we need to think about how we're preparing for that. So this is a photo of our workshop. We got together the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority with the university, the City of London, Indigenous peoples, a bunch of community volunteers, and we got to work. We started with a water blessing ceremony led by Wasezi Deliri and her daughter, shown here. And we worked mostly along the bank of the creek. You can see where we planted shrubs. They're mulched on the right side. But a really interesting part of this work was we created what were called live stakes. These are cuttings of willow trees, mature trees where we took pieces of branch off. We sharpened them kind of like a pencil, and then we wedged them deep into the ground. And just like if you were to plant, if you were to take a cutting from a house plant and tear off a piece of it and stick it in water, eventually it would start to grow roots. So that's what we did. You can see the stakes jutting out of the ground. And here's how they looked a year later, starting to grow into a standalone willow tree. And of course, I had to come back quite a bit, water them in the summer months. We had a few heat waves. Here's some Canada geese using the site as their habitat. The university was a keen player in this, displaying this and using it for pedagogy, teaching people about the project as it was unfolding. And we brought out a few different classes to plant, other native perennials, to document what species were occurring in the environment. Just some more photos of the site. We also hired an artist, Emma Richard, to visualize what the site would look like over time. So this way of graphically representing the change allowed us to imagine into the future beyond what we can see in the current conditions. And similarly, we can look underground and see how the conditions are changing beyond what we can see with the naked eye. There are the roots growing into the stream and actually creating habitat for fish. We know this is important because all over Ontario, we've lost a huge amount of our wetland cover, and that means there's going to be flooding. And the solutions for it include planting more trees along watercourses. We also know that when you plant trees along watercourses, it absorbs pollution that would otherwise run off and end up going downriver and affecting our First Nation neighbors. This is a group called Antler River Rally that I volunteer with. We clean up garbage every month, free for anybody to join. All these other things can also get caught up and flushed down the river, but having a thick layer of riparian vegetation can help a lot. And once that goes downriver, where do you think it ends up? Well, it follows, it drains into Lake St. Clair, which then drains into Lake Erie, then back up to Lake Ontario, and it creates algae blooms. And this is impacting everything that lives under the water and all of the life on land that depends on fish, for example. In working with the city, we tried to align it with their strategic plan, which talks about climate action and sustainable growth, namely protecting the Thames River, that we want to have a strong and healthy environment and natural heritage areas, that we're using green infrastructure technologies like planting trees, and then we're encouraging community-led climate action, etc. And so the city was a phenomenal supporter of this program. They advertised it widely. We teamed up with the London Public Library and offered information sessions. We also used this to share awareness of the city's programs for reducing flooding of basements, which they were having a hard time getting the word out for. So by linking it to an activity like planting trees and explaining how this is helping keep water out of people's basements, the city was able to advance their own education goals. Here's just some information about the city's program if you are interested. You can find more on the city's website. And if you visit the site now, there's this beautiful sign featuring the artwork. This continues to live on and engage the public. For example, you can take your smartphone, put it on that little stand above the yellow sign, snap a photo and upload it to our time lapse. And what we're hoping to build is a series showing how the vegetation is maturing and changing over time. Everybody who visits has an opportunity to become part of the project. So what are our key takeaways from this? That partnerships can significantly expand the impact of conservation projects. That the co-benefits of these projects will look different to different partners. So how do you make it relevant to their interests? You have to understand them. that when you bring in people to do work, you should pay them for that work. The grant actually budgeted to include honoraria for all of the students that were involved from Western, and that a project can continue to grow so long as people see themselves in it. Those opportunities for continued participation that I referenced. Okay, I'm going to skip this one in the interest of time because I do want to have a discussion with you. As you can tell, I'm passionate about this stuff and could be here for hours. This is just really about my garden and naturalizing it at home and making that a normal and healthy thing for people to do. Come talk to me about it after if you are interested, and this slide run through is not overwhelming for you. I will wrap my talk. This is a really long one. Okay, what can we learn from this? Pulling it all together. What does advocacy look like when it's successful? I say we should find meaning in the process of advocating and not just the outcomes and results. If you can show people instead of telling them, that's going to be way more powerful. Create the solution and then walk them through it. And create experiences for people that matter so that it's personally relevant to them. Your path to success is not going to be linear. You're going to make mistakes. Sometimes it might not seem like you're making progress, and you are. People are talking about it and they're understanding. We can build in the present what the society of the future is going to need from us. We can do that at local and hyper-local scales. It might seem tiny and insignificant compared to the scale of the world's problems. I promise it matters. If you want to advocate, you need to know who you are advocating to. So your audience, what do they want? When and how will they listen to you? And what are the co-benefits of the things you are asking to change? How should you communicate about those co-benefits? Make sure you're taking good care of your relationships with people who matter for your advocacy, because it's a long-term project and it's a team sport. You cannot do it by yourself. All of the projects I've discussed were supported by a whole team of people who I haven't had time to acknowledge. Be hard on the system, not on people. You might get really frustrated with folks. They're out there probably doing their best too. We can fix the system together. And so to wrap my talk, how do you find peace with the state of the world? All the bad stuff, all the good stuff. I think we should focus on what we can control. You can control acceptance of where we are in the present moment and the things that we can't change. You can control your story and how you talk about it. Don't aim to fix the whole world. Just try to understand and improve your world for whoever's in it. That might be you, that might be other people, that might be other non-human living things. Pick an issue that matters to you and start working on it. Make it matter to other people. You can't do everything, so choose something. When you succeed, your world will get bigger and your ability to influence change will grow. And so this might seem like the impossible, growing a tree that tall to become the overstory. You can. It starts with you building the understory. I want to thank you for your attention, and hopefully we have time for a few questions.
Brendon, thank you so much. I'm going to put a lot of pressure on you because I don't want to keep students late at dinner time. We have time for one on-camera question. It better be a good one. You will have to speak into this device, but I will ask you to stay following.
Absolutely.
And just speak to people one-on-one and we can keep the conversation going.
Happy to. It'll be candid. What's
going to be our one really, really thoughtful, life-changing question? Who's got it? I'll do the 7 seconds of silence. I know it exists. Thank you. Look at this champ. Thank you so much.
Should I stand up?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, should I stand anywhere specific?
No, right here's good.
What do you think your activities have contributed to in the community that shows a positive outlook for the future as for maintaining conservation areas and biodiversity around our city of London? And how do you anticipate that your work will continue to benefit and inspire others to pursue similar goals in their fields?
Okay, two-part question there.
I like it.
It's a tough one. Okay, I would say, first of all, as I referenced, I can't take sole credit for anything. You're always working in a huge team of people, right? The two older folks sitting behind you actually are some of the pioneers of the strong policies that we've got for protecting nature in London, going back decades. one thing that I think I contributed to with a lot of support from Carrie Moreland, who's here, is growing awareness of iNaturalist and empowering people to document the living things in the environment. I didn't have time to discuss it towards the end because, to be honest, I didn't budget this all correctly. But in my last bit, what I was going to talk about is how a lot of people are restoring nature on private property. And it's kind of a black spot in terms of us not knowing what lives there. But people are recording things on iNaturalist. So every year we offer programming like the City Nature Challenge, where folks can go out and record all the living things that they see. And those data are now referenced by people who do planning for the city. They will actually look at what people have posted on iNaturalist before approving a development at a particular site, for example. So, I mean, I think I've contributed to that, like repairing the relationship between people and ecology. As for inspiring other people, I mean, I love talking to students of all ages. I was with kindergartners a few weeks ago planting seeds. I think if you can get people excited about anything in nature and seeing how they can relate to it, you're creating more opportunities for experience extending beyond your time together. So I've been really fortunate through my relationships and network to have a lot of access to people like that, and have created some programming that I think is changing people's lives, I hope.
Brendon, I want to thank you for your time. I also want to give us a time to thank you formally with clapping. So thank you.